Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Stu and the Nun, episode 372, with my good friend Carlos Hernandez. Stu and the Nun both have the night off, so you get me. So, and my good buddy, longtime friend Carlos Hernandez. Carlos, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Rob. It's finally you invited me onto the show, so I appreciate it. And I feel like they backed out, going, all right, you know what? It's one of Rob's buddies, so we probably shouldn't jump into this mix. But no, I appreciate that. So as Rob mentioned, my name is Carlos Hernandez. I have been in international global trade for over 20 years. I've worked and started off with the Department of Commerce and did a little stint in that side of it. Also with the state of Texas International Affairs Department, and then kind of made my way into the semiconductor. I'm located here in Austin, Texas. So, it's semiconductor, telecommunications, technology, semiconductor is what we do. And so I've made my way through a couple of different companies, and right now I work for a company out of Northern California, and we have about 5 different technology companies, and we do manufacturing all over the world, including here in the United States. And we do everything from LED lights all the way to building supercomputers, super nodes and clusters.
Okay, and of course, you're a veteran. You're a scout, which is it's basically infantry, as the joke
Yeah,
goes.
no, I mean, well, yeah. Once they put us mechanized, we might as well just be called infantry.
So you mentioned a couple of things in there, in the technology, and one of the biggest things right now that we'll go into is AI, right? And so how that not only today with the current administration and what they're pushing, but how tariffs play into that and everything, because you're on the trade side. So let's talk a little bit about AI and the technology and how the tariffs and stuff affect that.
So that's you brought up that really good point about trade compliance, because everybody just identifies this umbrella of regulations, but these regulations are really split into 2 sides, and a lot of companies, they split those, and it really is imports and exports. Totally different regulations, totally different agencies within the government that manage and regulate those pieces of it. And so when you talk about HPC and AI, that's more focused on export control, which is controlled by the Department of Commerce, more specifically the Bureau of Industry and Security within Commerce. And so it's gotten so convoluted. I mean, it started off with the first Trump administration. They kind of started putting in some things and that kind of set the tone. Then what happened was the Biden administration decided to turn the knob and really make it. And so what happens is the U.S. is trying to control our national security and getting that level of technology in the hands of China's military, and so forth. And so when we say China, everybody should automatically understand that it's a trifecta. It's not just China. China is Hong Kong and Macau as well. So it's always going to be those 3. And so everybody, just because back in the day, Hong Kong used to get that pass, that get out of jail free card from a trade compliance perspective. It didn't have as much controls as China does, but now they do. So what happened is they put a lot of controls on the chips that go into machine learning and AI building and those types of things, along with the servers and nodes, by controlling, when they go to China, but more importantly, when the actual technology levels. And so you have to now do a lot of calculations. And I am not a math guy. We both know this. So I, that's kind of the stuff that you leave to engineers. But now you have a crossover between very technical aspects of export controls, but it's regulatory. So so now your businesses and different companies are really having to work together internally to identify that. So those controls were all fine and they were needed, and it was great that the administration did that. But the Biden administration, like I said, they turned the knob right before in December, before the administration walked out the door. And, it was kind of like they dropped the mic and said, follow that. And everybody was like, no, what the hell are you doing, man? And let me tell you, industry said that. And there was a lot of F bombs and a lot of F and a lot of hell no's, because there was a lot of, your big names, your NVIDIAs, your Cisco's, your AMD's, all those. What it was going to do was it was going to lock down the amount of high performance computers, supercomputers, nodes, and integrated circuits that for these types of builds that you could send to a certain country, or that you could even send to a end user. Let's just say, for example, it's a U.S. company and they have a location in Germany. It would have locked down the amount that they could, and then it was gonna put the onus also on that destination end user who's buying that stuff. They now have to file a register with the U.S. government and all these different types of things. And it was just, and not only that, but it was going to hinder sales. I mean, just revenue. It was just going. If you have a limit of what you can sell, and that's what you do as a job as an industry, it's gonna shut you down. So the Trump administration came in and they said, dude, this is not good for business. We know the Trump administration is all about money. We've seen some of the deals, and we'll talk about tariffs here in a second. But they just said, look, this is not good. And so they just put a kibosh on that. They said, look, we're not going to enforce those things. And then they finally just started reversing, those aspects of it. And, while we're on the topic of that, before I give you a chance to talk, the administration, Trump also just rolled out an executive order last week and said, hey, we get it. We're going to control it, but we're opening the market back up for these HPCs and this AI stuff and everything else. We're just going to do it the right way. And that's exactly the way it should be done.
Well, as with anything, there's multiple layers to AI, right? So, but at its basic levels, you've got code that runs on a computer, right? So most people think of just a supercomputer, a very powerful computer running this AI, but I mean that's what it is it's an AI model, which is code, right? It's code and data behind that. So understanding what little I know of trade compliance, and we know that certain things and certain components you can't send to certain countries, right? So like Cisco, for example, has encryption and built into some of their devices, and you can't ship some of that stuff directly to them. Not that China hasn't stolen some of that technology already, or they kind of backdoor it and buy it through some other countries. But what are the kind of the rules and regulations around the AI models and the software component to it?
So that the software is something in the encryption that's getting enhanced. But I'll be honest with you, that's been kind of a loophole, because they've been so focused on hardware, and because you have to have certain clusters and certain circuits that operate and can run at the speeds to machine learn, do the aspects of AI, and then like you said, but you have the software. So the ESD software that they haven't that had in China for for those aspects, and it also runs tools. And so a lot of manufacturers ran into some issues, and the Trump administration dialed that back recently as well. So the software is coming. Let's just put it this way. The software companies have had kind of get out of jail free card for a little bit, and we're seeing more and more of it. But I think it's something that the Commerce Department is definitely going to be focusing on next.
So what kind of challenges is that going to create for you on the trade compliance side? Is that just another column you're going to have to look at and reference? Or because that's something that's sent digitally, right? So that's not something you send to UPS or DHL or something, you package it up. That's dropped on a Git library somewhere, and sent.
So the interesting part is when you talk about technical aspects of control, the government likes to give everything a number. When we were born, they gave us a number, a social security number. When we were in the army, they gave us a number. When you do anything, the IRS, it's always a number. So trade compliance works the same way. When you have a product, this pen, for example, it's going to have a number, but because it's not controlled, they just give it a basic non-control, which is called EAR 99. But what happens is these export control numbers, they're categorized by different things. They're categorized by it's an actual product, a part, a component. Then it's not a component, but it's a equipment, or then it's a technology, or it's a software. And so you still have the same requirements for all of those different pieces. The difference is the numbers changed. Right. It's an alphanumeric. And so if you have let's just say you have a server and it has an export control 4A003, that just means that it's a product and it's an actual piece. But then when it's the software that supports and the application for that, then it goes 4D or 4E, and it just changes. So you just have to go to the regulation in that piece and see what its requirements are. So it's
for a product, right? Let's just use the server as an example, and you've given it a designation, right? You've given it its number. If I change that product, let's say I switch from a Cirrus Logic chip to some other chip. Do I now is that a different product and I have to give it a new number?
So that's where we were when I was talking about the calculations. Mm-hmm. So if you have a chip in that server that is EAR 99, so it's not controlled. Right. It doesn't have the level of technology to control, to do something. Then that server, that control, it goes boop and steps down. But once you have that advanced chip in there, it takes that server boop, and pops it right up to, you are now under this level of control, and you have to meet all of these criteria.
Where I was going with that is on the software side, right? There's a big difference between Windows 10 and Windows 11, right? It's a major upgrade. But what about Windows 10 Service Pack 3? Do I have to, because that's software, right? And I deliver it's a patch. I've discovered something in my AI model that has a flaw, and I've patched it to fix it. Am I going to have to renumber that? And how do you control that?
So anybody that develops software, you go to Red Hat, for example, and you can pull up their stuff and their packages. They'll have all of the export control numbers, so that when you download that and you put it into part of your package, you now know what its controls are, and then you should disclose that to your customers, so that when they're building something into, or they're integrating it in, they now know what the requirements are.
Okay. So what are some of the other challenges with all of this? I mean, that's a lot to get your arms around.
It is, man. It's some of the challenges are, it's always changing. It's evolving. So it's funny. You mentioned being in the military. Just like these tariffs or whatever else. It reminded me of hurry up and wait. Mm-hmm. And then when we hurried up and waited, and then it changed, and they're like, oh, well, no, never mind. We're not doing that. We're doing this. And you're like, all right. And then all of a sudden you start getting everything together, and then they're like, no, never mind. We're going back this way again. You're like, come on, man. That is what regulations for export controls and tariffs now seem like. Back when I started, this, 15, 20 plus years ago, export regulations changed about maybe every 4, 5, 6 years. And the changes weren't substantial. Now they're changing substantially every couple of months. And so companies now have to understand what they're dealing with. They have to put those checks and controls in place. And if they don't, The problem is that once you violate, you violate. I mean, Seagate, for example, I mean, that's a big name company. What was it last year? They announced they were fined $300 million.
Wow.
That's a huge amount. Cadence Systems with out of California was just announced. I think it was $30 million or $90 million or something that they have to pay, because the problem that you run into is when you violate something, it's per shipment. So if you get an order for 100 servers or 100 widgets and you're going to export one a week, every time you did it up until that 100, you now have 100 violations, and there is criminal and civil penalties. And then of course, your name is in the media and all that kind of stuff. And people don't like that. So the challenge is that a lot of people that didn't know what export regulations are, they're starting to figure it out. Trade compliance people, they were always, hey, you're in quality, throw this. Hey, you do contracts. You've seen a regulation or two. You can do this. It's not like that anymore.
Hey, Private, I know you're a motor pool, but come over here. I've got some floors for you to mop.
Yeah, exactly. I need you to change out this Bradley engine. You're like,
yeah,
what? Dude, I'm good. I'm possibly do PMC maintenance at best.
right. So do you think there's probably some challenges with each, but I would think that your smaller companies not having the resources to put into trade compliance probably are having a harder time with the moving target than a larger company. I mean, you guys you can afford a little bit to sit and wait and kind of watch and maybe wait for something to happen. But in the same sense, you probably can't either, because you're a large company and you do a lot of business. So which one of those do you think has the harder with this changing landscape?
The smaller companies are definitely going to have a challenge if they're operating on a global scale, and so they're going to have to invest in that. And a lot of companies, what they'll do is consult. There's a lot of consultants. One of the things that I didn't mention is, I'm the president of the Austin Trade Compliance Association. We have over 250 members and over 125 companies, in the area. A lot of them are consultants. A lot of them are law firms that do these types of things. And you can go out to them and get guidance and say, okay, because if you manufacture 20 items and you sell those globally, you can just take that technology to a consultant or to an outside law firm and tell them, here, I need you to help me classify these things and identify what my restrictions are.
Right.
Then you're done. And you now know what your parameters are. But if you are a small company and you're manufacturing 1,000 items, you are going to have some controls that you need to put in place. And the best thing that I can tell anybody to do is make sure that you put in place an end use statement. It is the best thing that you can possibly do, because what it does is it identifies all the parties to the transaction.
Okay.
It identifies who's buying it, if there's an intermediate, a consignee, who the ultimate consignee is, who the end user is, what the end uses are. And once you've captured all that, you have all the right data to make the right decision if you're able to do something. And if they lie, the U.S. government says, "Hey, did you do your due diligence? There's a portion out of the Export Administration regulations in Supplement 2 of 742 is know your customer. That if you have that end use statement and they filled it out, you now know you applied. If they lied and the government comes back to you and says, "Hey, man, you did," you're like, "Whoa, dude, this is who they said it was going to, and this is what they said they were going to do." And then they say, all right, you know what? Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
So you can't use the excuse they lied to you or you didn't know.
If they lied to you and they lied to you on that form, knowing that your product is controlled, and you identified in that in-use statement that it is controlled, and then they're required to comply with U.S. export regulations, that helps substantially.
Okay. But you can still get in trouble for it's still the onus is on you because you're the manufacturer of whatever.
You're the exporter of record. If you're exporting it out of the U.S., then you're liable. But the best thing is, you remember when we were kids, everybody said, "Hey, man, we don't like nobody likes a tattletale," and your brother would whoop your ass if you told on him. The difference is the government wants you to tell on yourself, but more importantly, your competitor will tell on you.
Right.
And if they tell on you before you tell, you go and tell mom first before your brother can go and do it, you're not going to get in as much trouble.
Right.
And so the government wants you to do that, and they're a little bit more lenient. They're not as bad as you think. I was on the phone with an enforcement officer with Commerce earlier, and I'm just a nice guy. He just wants to help.
Right. So let's talk a minute about the different kinds of tariffs, right? I mean, people just think tariffs is this big umbrella, right? But there's different kinds, and some of these executive orders from the president, right? Kind of affect things in different ways. So let's kind of talk about that real quick.
All right. Yeah, because I mean that is literally hot off the press. While we were getting ready for this, I was reading things and IMing with people and talking about all kinds of different stuff. When the administration came in and started putting a lot of onus on changes with tariffs, it confused a lot of people because they didn't understand and what the impacts were and how they worked. And it's very, very simple to know that tariffs have been around for years. I mean, that's how the U.S. government made their money up until I think like in the late 60s, early 70s. And then, then they started taxing everybody and, and doing those types of things. And that's how revenue was coming in. But tariffs have always been there. They're standard. Textiles, cars, whatever the case may be. That's what you call a standard tariff. Then the first Trump administration came in and said, hey, we don't like China. They didn't say that, but they just said, China's got an advantage, man. So we're going to tax them because they're getting away with stuff. So that's called a specialty tariff. And a lot of people in the industry would call that specific one is called a 301 China tariff. And you hear the different ones like they're talking about aluminum and steel. Those fall into a 232 and those types of things. But those are specialty tariffs. So you have your regular tariff, then you had this specialty tariff based off of a country and the product. All right, so we're good. We got those. That's easy enough. Then they wanted to double it down. And the Trump administration came back in swinging. And I was like, all right, man, this dude's been practicing. He's bobbing and weaving. He's just throwing whatever kinds of jabs out there. And the first jab was IEEPA tariffs. And that was based off of the fentanyl. And that happened with Canada and Mexico and then China, because, of course, a lot of the resources and stuff for fentanyl come out of China. That one was basically 20%. And they said, look, this is it. You can't do anything. You can't pass go and collect $200. You pay it. That's it. You're done. And that was 20%. So that was started off your first, policy tariff. Because that's a policy. We made that decision as a regulatory aspect. So everybody got used to hearing this IEEPA. It almost sounds like, something that somebody would yell in the Army or in the Marines or something. But they got used to that. Then they turned around and said, Liberation Day. And we all remember that term, and everybody's looking at it. What's going down, man? What's going to happen on April 2nd? Well, that's when they rolled out two different things. They rolled out a universal tariff and a reciprocal tariff. And everybody's heard this reciprocal quite often. So basically what they said is, look, every country in the world, 10%. Universal across the board, kind of like taxes or whatever else. This is where you start. Everybody pays this. Except for these countries. They said, we don't like them. because the trade's not fair. So it's reciprocal. They're not doing a fair trade for us, so we're reciprocating and doing not fair trade with them. So these countries had way up. I mean, we saw that. I mean, the biggest example was China. It got up to 170% when everybody was going, when they were going back and forth on all that stuff. But all these other countries, Taiwan was 32%. Some of these other countries, 40, 50%. That was the reciprocal tariff. Mm-hmm. And so that's the one that got placed on hold. And that's the one that everybody is right now concerned about. And right hot off the press, like I mentioned, the administration, Trump just rolled out an executive order just an hour or two ago with the new tariffs and stuff like that. So a great example, I just mentioned that Taiwan was 32% originally in April. Now it came out and it's 20%. And, Korea ended up dropping down to 15%. And Malaysia as well went from, I think it was in the 30s, and now they were 25, and I think now they're 20. And so those are the new pieces of tariffs. But then everybody goes, oh, man, we get all that stuff from Taiwan. Really? I mean, that's where our laptops come from, or that's where whatever else, or, or my cell phone. Well, then it's 20%. They're on that reciprocal tariff. But wait, there's more. There's an exemption list. The administration and everybody said, look, man, we want to go to war, financially, but we don't want to lose our ass. So we're not gonna. We know that everybody depends on those laptops or these servers or whatever else, or these other electronics or other material. So we're going to put those items on this exemption list, and we're going to say, hey, if that country is on that reciprocal list and that product that you're bringing in is on that exemption list, don't worry about it, man. You don't have to pay taxes. You don't have to pay tariff. You're good.
So some more bureaucracy for the sake of bureaucracy. To kind of, it's that whole bluster that's politics, right? Let me put up a good face, but then back behind the scenes, I'll be making these other deals that don't make it seem as bad, right? Now, one of the biggest arguments I always hear, for tariffs is, well, if tariffs are so bad, why do other countries put them on American goods? People seem to forget that the countries, want to protect their type of industries, right? For an example, I think it was Japan or China. It could have been both. Charges like 100% tariff on any rice you ship into the country, right? That's to protect one of their mainstay products that they grow in the country. And so people always think that, well, it's just the Americans trying to take advantage of other countries. When in some cases we have been taken advantage of because we are the biggest consumer on the planet.
Sure. I mean, look at one of the things that came out of the EU deal was energy. The EU, they get energy within, and then, I mean, they were even getting energy from Russia and, and other sources and stuff like that. Now they decided, oh, well, wait a minute, we're going to give them an opportunity to buy lower tariff, but they're going to promise to buy U.S. product.
Right. That
increases our revenue and our economy, and that way. But also, there were, like you mentioned, there's tariffs on U.S. goods going into certain countries, like in the EU. There's also restrictions. You couldn't import U.S. vehicles in certain aspects. Now there's with this deal, they're saying, oh, we're going to now start loosening and opening this market. Now that's more U.S. vehicles that can be sold to another market that we didn't have a market share to.
So Germany is going to be flooded with Harleys? Is that what you're telling me?
Well, I'm thinking it's going to be an F-150 or a Raptor jacked up and everything else. They're just going to be mowing over things.
Have you ever seen the streets in Germany? They're pretty narrow. Those F-150, they don't fit. So Uh, yeah.
I mean,
So
they're great traction on those cobblestone roads, though. I mean,
right,
come on.
yeah, yeah, to the moss and the rain. So um, so how does this affect supply chain, right? Because nothing is just like, with the exception of maybe crops, right? But there's things that come into play with that as well. So you need fertilizer for the crops. A lot of that is imported from other countries. But when you're talking, computers or components or things like that, it's all of these different pieces. So how does that affect the supply chain as a whole?
So it it convolutes it and makes it very difficult. And here's the reason why. Um, Number one, let's just use a very simplistic example of manufacturing in the US. If you
Yeah.
want to manufacture a product, and let's just say that you have three items that you need to buy and import in. You can buy the other two domestically. So it's five items that are going into this one product that you're building. And these three other products, you're sourced from all the different countries. Now you have this tariff fluctuation of the U.S. administration's mad. They didn't do this. They didn't do that. They just bombed somebody, and now it violates national security for the U.S. that you have to say that for it to fall under IEPA rules to be able to make an adjustment to tariff, kind of like the Trump administration just did today with on Canada and increase the tariffs on them because now they're wanting to support a Palestinian state. So now what happens when you are buying this product and you know it's going to cost you $10 in tariff? So now you do your cost bill analysis. You know what it costs you and resources and everything to manufacture that product. Now you set your cost and you sell it. Now the administration turns around and geopolitical, whatever the case may be, and it went from $10 and now it's going to cost you $100. How do you make that adjustment?
Right.
And when you're selling that product for $50 to your customer, and now it's going to cost you X amount more, you go to your customer and say, hey, I'm going to increase the cost. Here's the problem. I have a contract.
Right.
You signed it. You both signed it. And how do you negotiate? How can you get out of that? So there's a lot of things right now that companies are doing. Number one, they're changing sales terms, and they're called Incoterms. And that identifies who is responsible for freight, import, and export type of things. It identifies all the parties that are responsible. So companies are going and changing the sales terms. And if you can't, then the costs have to go up. The other part is now they're going in and reevaluating contracts that you're already in place and those types of things. And you're having to make adjustments. If you have manufacturing facilities in two different countries and one of the countries gets hit massively by a tariff importing into the US, well, now you have to shift manufacturing to your US facility, and now you're at capacity. And sure. Now, so there's all of these different elements that you have to look at. And so supply chain is, it's a sliding scale. They're constantly moving. I'm getting hit up by supply chain managers, directors, and VPs hourly. What's the rate? What are we looking at? What are you doing? Other people within, the industry call us. What have you seen? We don't know. We just don't, and how can you make a business decision and you're dealing with a customer and you're about to sign a $10 million contract, but you can't identify if you can sell that product for $50 or you have to sell it for $100 because of the tariff.
So do you see any, maybe not within your company, but do you foresee companies that are taking and moving that manufacturing? Because now, like let's say steel is an example, right? And you make a widget and it requires X amount of steel. Well, the cost to ship that in is whatever it is. Well, the cost to ship in my completed product, there is no tariff, right? It just gets shipped in free because it's a completed product. So now if I move my manufacturing somewhere else where there's no tariff on steel and I manufacture it over there but ship my product in, is that a way that you can get around that tariff and save some money?
No, there's de minimis rules, and there's all kinds of other different rules. But here's the thing: is that a lot of people will say, okay, you know what? Let's just use a rack for a server. Let's just say it's metal, it's steel.
Right.
Okay, I manufacture that in the U.S. It's all that steel, whatever else, and I import in, and it's a cost. Let's manufacture it in Mexico or somewhere else. Let's not use Mexico because that's USMCA, and we don't want to get into that complexities. But they want to manufacture that in Brazil. Well, Brazil now is a 40% tariff. Well, we don't want to do it there. So let's do it in Belize. All right. Belize, 0%. Oh, but guess what? It's still a metal rack system. It's not raw material rack. It's still a metal that falls under a certain category of that steel. And if it's manufactured, if it's that steel, then you're still going to pay a tariff. It's all about where that product falls within the tariff structure. And again, like I mentioned, a number, you hear the acronym HTS, and that's a harmonized tariff schedule. And that's basically a product's social security number. Okay. And if it falls under that number, that HTS number, then you look over to the right and you see what percentage it is, or then you click on the extra little button and you see your country and you're like, oh, dang, man. I crapped out.
So you mentioned USMCA. Are you up to speed on that? I mean, can you talk to that at all at any level?
I am. You know, the hard part is that I've been in the technology sector for majority of my career.
And technology doesn't come out of Mexico, does it?
They're getting there, man. They're definitely doing better, but it's still not there. You know, you're not having a lot of semiconductor technology manufacturing. You do have some like certain electronic builds that are happening in Mexico and those types of things. We talked about exemptions. You know, let's put it this way: like Trump's not going to put I don't like to single out a person. The Trump administration is not going to put a control on golf clubs because he likes to golf.
Right.
We're not going to put a control on things that we know Americans like, or that is a big benefit to. And so that's why those things fall on that exemption list.
Right.
And so USMCA, even though you put a 30% tariff on Mexico or Canada, but then you have the USMCA, which is everybody, old school knew it as NAFTA. But now you have those. And now you go, oh, well, it qualifies as USMCA, so it's duty free. So then, it's no harm, no foul. But because of the fentanyl, IEEPA tariffs that we talked about earlier, you still have that still falls into effect. And here's the other thing about tariffs is that you can recover some. Just because you imported something and paid tariff on it, it's kind of like your taxes. You pay taxes all year long, then you turn around and you file a tax return and you're like, come on, no whammies. Bam, I get $10 back. Sweet. Yeah. Back in the day, we definitely got a lot more, but that's the same thing with tariffs. If you did something that qualifies for you to recover it back, you can. And a lot of times everybody hears a term duty drawback. Okay. And duty drawback basically says, look, you brought something into the country, you imported it, and you paid taxes, paid tariff on it, but for some reason it destroyed. It was shelf life, out of life, whatever else. You show a destruction, and you're part of this program. You get accepted to this program. You can recover that back, or you exported it back. A lot of distributors, they bring in product, they shelve it into a big distribution center, and then they get a big, huge order from Mexico to, do something on a car or whatever else. It's got a chip that needs to go in there, or a light bulb, or, or an LED bulb or something like that. Well, you can say, hey, man, I sent this back out. It wasn't consumed in the U.S. Sure. They allow you to go back and recover that tariff. And that's what a lot of companies are doing right now, because also with manufacturing, there's a consumption. If you consume that product in manufacturing and it now is a new product and you export it out, if you can prove that product came in, and there's a couple of other things that work into play there, and you can get creative with, but you can prove that product was consumed in that product that got exported, you can also go back and get your money back.
So there's a lot of companies right now. When some of them I was reading earlier, the Walmarts, the Kmarts, some of the automobile manufacturers are now
still around.
I think so. But anyway, Target. Maybe I'm thinking Target. But anyway, Target. But all of these is being reported that these companies are now either raising their prices or reporting losses versus last year. And is that media bluster? Is that true? Is this anti-Trump, TDS? What is your opinion on these companies? I mean, because there's a lot of them right now saying we're either going to raise prices or we're losing money, which, to add to that, cracks me up, because the numerous people that normally scream these companies are making too much money are now siding with them, going, see what Trump did? It's this tribalism. So they get to choose somebody just because it hurts this person, but they hated this person last week or this company last week. So but what's your thoughts on, I mean, is this true? Is this just media bluster? Is this?
So at the end of the day, your company is trying to, if you're publicly traded, especially, you have to make certain revenue, and because you're posting it, and your shareholders, and they expect you to perform and continue to perform at certain rates with certain returns. And if you don't do that, then you're losing cap share, and your numbers go down. Your stock just goes down. Now, if you're a private company, then you just have numbers that you're having to meet to operating costs and expenses and all of those different things. But let me ask you this question. How many times have you been watching TV and seen an ad or a commercial for let's just go back to the F-150, because we were chatting about it earlier. This F-150, for Memorial Day weekend, you can get $8,000 off.
Right.
If you come in this weekend, we will knock off $8,000 and give you free oil changes for a year.
Right.
And we know those have gotten quite expensive, especially for an F-150, where you're like 5-6 quarts of oil, at least.
Depending on the motor, depending.
Yeah, and so how are they taking a loss? No, they're not taking a loss. They're lowering the cost because they know they're going to sell more. And so therefore they're compensating for that piece of it. The problem is that when you have a company that is used to making a certain margin in revenue off of a product, if somebody doesn't buy something like a Walmart, they don't buy something for $1 and sell it for $1.05.
Right.
They buy it for $1 and they sell it for $6.
Yeah. Or more if it's water and it's hurricane season.
Exactly. So when they talk about increasing costs, some are going to have to increase costs because there's compounded factors that go into it, in the sense of electricity costs. So the cost of electricity, the cost of you had certain benefits or tax benefits that are expiring. And so now you're going to have to pay those different things. There's all kinds of different things that can happen within a company's structure. But at the end of the day, if something goes up 10% on a Taiwan product or something like that, you're going to have an impact. let's just use this example. They were doing an analysis on Taiwan because Taiwan knew they were going to get hit with these tariffs. Basically, Taiwan said, look, all these companies, they all said, all right, you know what? If we get hit with 10%, we'll be all right. We're good.
Right.
15%, some of these smaller shops are going to, they're going to have to cut down on personnel and everything else. 20%, which is what happened, it's a little bit more of an impact.
Sure.
It's going to be a little bit more of a struggle. So the more that percentage goes up, the
Right.
companies are going to have that bigger impact. And if you have a larger amount from those locations that have the higher percentages, then of course you're gonna have more of an impact.
So I saw a sign when I was in the home building industry. I saw a sign that said, "If it's on sale, it wasn't priced right in the first place." So
no, it was priced right for that day.
yeah. So what is your response? Because this is the next thing I see. When Ford starts complaining or whomever, you see an article, and it's like, well, if you would just
I hope Ford's not one of your sponsors, man, because we're gonna give.
no, we're not sponsored by them, but more conservatives, more pro-American. What I see is, well, if you would just manufacture everything here and buy local products, you wouldn't have this problem. So, what is your response to that?
Sure, but the problem is that the difference is that if you manufacture here, you're going to have more personnel employed. You're going to have more people employed, more people that are spending, and more people that are paying taxes, and more money that's going into the, it's cyclical. It's going through. Now, if you have more people or companies manufacturing, then whatever you manufacture, you're now not having to source from so far away and then paying import tariffs and everything else that way. So now if we were using that example of 5 items, and 2 you were able to buy in the US, but 3 you had to import. Well, let's just say now that you change that to 4. 4 of those items are domestic because now there's manufacturing of that other 1 or 2 that are now manufacturing that. 1, your freight costs are lower. 2, your turn time's lower, so your lead time on manufacturing is going to lower. And so those are all benefits. But if you manufacture something that takes 1,000 items of bill of material, I try not to say bomb, especially when I'm at an airport or I'm being recorded, but a bill of material, the chances are that you're going to get the cheapest cost of some of those bill of material items for 100 or 1,000 items to build your product domestically. It's just not going to happen. You're going to have to source some of it.
Yeah. The other thing is you can't build manufacturing plants overnight, right? So these take you, depending on what you're building, right, and what you're producing, what you're, whether it's a oil plant that's going to, process oil into something else. It takes time to build that stuff. So to tell a Ford or a Target, well, just buy here. I get it. I understand you want to do that, and yes, it will employ more people. But it's like turning an aircraft carrier. You can't just, turn it on a dime and do that. You can't just pull it back. I mean, especially since we've spent decades, pushing towards this global economy, and producing things in all the other countries. Now, I think it probably makes sense, and I want to get your opinion on this, for the U.S. to analyze what are the true basic needs of this country. And a good example is one of the things we saw during COVID was the majority of the chemicals needed for the medications here were produced in China, shipped to India, and then shipped to here. And we had a huge supply chain problem. Now, you could solve some of that if you did more of that here. And if there were something like a world war, which has been threatened for the last several years, or another tsunami or another COVID, hopefully not, then you could turn that aircraft carrier a little bit quicker and respond. But
so when you talk about and that's key, because COVID exposed so much of that dependency on supply chain and those aspects of it and what the effects were. More importantly, from national security. And that's why you see so much defense and government purchases that now require you to do an analysis of what's the country of origin on the products that you're building and or that you're having to use to build the supply chain, because they need to know if something happens, shit goes down, are we still going to be able to buy this product that goes into this Bradley or goes into this, aircraft carrier to deploy?
Yeah.
And if they're not able to do it because what they're buying from you is using 25% or more of foreign content,
Yeah.
you're stuck.
Well, back to that analysis, and I think some of them have gone down this path and kind of raised this flag. Another example of that is our power grid, right? We've been saying for decades how susceptible our power grid, how weak and inefficient and susceptible to any kind of attack. Well, it was discovered a couple of years ago. A good number of the products that go into our power grid are manufactured in China. One of our number one adversaries when it comes to espionage and theft of PI and things like that. So I think we need to go deeper into that as a country and start looking at these things and go, for national security purposes, these are the things that cannot be manufactured out, no matter how much we need them from somebody else and how much resources it's going to take. I think we need to produce these here.
But here's the other bigger problem, is that it's the elements, the raw material that goes into the build even of some of these products. We all know that that technology, semiconductor, and all these different elements, you can't make any of these pieces, these things, these transistors, these circuits without having gallium, germanium, and these rare metals and earth minerals that we don't have, or we haven't discovered a whole lot enough and or resources to be able to get those. And the problem is that a lot of that stuff does go into government, military, and those types of pieces. So not only, like you mentioned, do we have to do that assessment, but we also have to do the assessment not just on the product. What does it take to build that product?
Sure.
And if we are still dependent on those minerals and resources and everything else, we need a plan B or a different option.
Well, the good thing is, some of those materials you can store for long term, right? Some of them can't, some of them have lifespan. But if you're shipping in raw materials, there is a 99.9% less chance of espionage in the material versus shipping in the chip, right?
Yep.
So if China, and I'm not saying they did or didn't, I don't know, all of these devices that are part of our power grid, if they put things in there where they could just flip a switch and turn them off, we're screwed. We're desperately.
So that's why there are lists, and there are what are called federal. And so not only in my day job do I do trade compliance, but I also do federal contract compliance, which falls into another aspect of federal acquisition regulations, which are FARs, and then DFARs, which is for defense. There are restrictions that state you can't utilize any of these companies or any of these products or services from any of these companies, or you can't buy a product that utilizes directly or indirectly a product that was manufactured by that entity or its subsidiaries in a product that you're building and selling to the U.S. government, because the U.S. government procurement won't allow it.
Right.
And you have to do that due diligence.
Right. But we like I said, we have discovered that China is manufacturing a good portion of our stuff. and who knows what they've put into where. Maybe they didn't put it in every one of them. Maybe they put it in every 100th one of them that they shipped in, and we're only inspecting the first 10. Right?
Well,
Open up the box, look in, and let it go.
but you know what? That's another thing, and I know we only have a few more minutes, but one of the things that we were talking about before was vulnerabilities within supply chain.
Sure.
One of the things that I did earlier today was one of my companies is CTPAT certified, which is Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism. It's a supply chain security program that basically you have vetted your whole supply chain from cradle to grave, and you can vet and know the security it's secure because you know where it manufactures, all the resources, the transit, and when it gets to that location. So what do you do with that supply chain? It's vulnerable. There's all kinds of different things. And one of the things that I was teaching what training about was you're always looking. People put things in packages. They want to steal your containers or whatever else, or they want to do this, or they want to get into your manufacturing, or they want to use your documents because you're certified. So customs says, you're good. We know you're secure.
Right.
But if somebody stole your paperwork that has your name on it and put something else, and we saw vulnerabilities with supply chain. Now, you can, whether you think it was a positive or a negative, it was actually kind of cool. It was like some cloak and daggers, some born shit or whatever else. But when Israel put those exploding devices in the pagers and the walkie-talkies that ended up exploding with Hezbollah, that happened within a supply chain.
Sure.
That's a vulnerability. Imagine
Right.
if it wasn't a government that did it, it was a malicious intent on top of a government that did it.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's all about if you can pay somebody. And that was one of the things that I trained today too, is I was like, dude, you have somebody in your shipping department that rolls in a Maserati and he's the one that nobody's checking his stuff that's going in and out. You might want to check your supply chain and figure out where that stuff's shipping and what's in the box.
It's funny. I was just reading an article about a woman they were calling the millionaire Medicaid queen, and she claimed she was only making like $100,000 a month. That's what she claimed. Well, years later they dug into it, and she owned like 6 different companies and was making millions. She bought a Lamborghini, and she was on Medicaid and all this other government assistance, and she bought a Lamborghini. Crazy. Well, we've been going for about an hour. Anything you want to? Any last comments? Anything you want to get to touch on?
Yeah. So trade compliance, it's the two sides. You got import, you got export, and it's like Texas weather. If you don't like it, just wait a minute. It's gonna change.
Yeah.
And you got to be prepared for it. You and your wife are going to a ball game. Take your raincoat.
Right.
You got to be prepared. So that would be the one thing that I would say to so many of these companies, so many of these people that are going out and using their life savings, they're cashing in their 401ks to start their dream business because they know there's a market and they've seen and done these things, whatever else. Yes, it is. And there's a great opportunity. Do your due diligence, know your customers, know what you're bringing in, make sure you're doing it right, know what you're shipping out, make sure you're doing it right.
Right. All right. Good advice. Good advice.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Make sure you go visit our vendors, our support group, Gear for Grunts. Get your Rapid Access Magazine pouches for your AR devices. Alpha Elite Performance. Take your workouts to the next level. Enlisted Night Fight Company, your apparel for your lifestyle. And Marvita, your go-to fishing for Cabo. So thanks everybody, and have a good evening. Thank you, Carlos.
Thanks, Rob. Take it easy, bud.